Martin Scorsese is considered by many to be the greatest living director, and here at JoBlo, we're inclined to agree. For over 50 years, Scorsese has been regularly churning out masterpieces at a truly dizzying rate. Has he ever made a legitimately bad film? Even his big failures, like New York, New York, are worth watching and occasionally brilliant. So-called lesser efforts, like After Hours, are actually quite brilliant upon re-examination, but the question remains, what are Martin Scorsese's best films? Truth be told, that is an impossible question to answer. When you're working on the level of Scorsese, it's hard to quantify what his best work is, so many of his films are absolutely brilliant that a case could be made for everything from Mean Streets to Taxi Driver to Raging Bull to Goodfellas to Last Temptation of Christ, Silence, and beyond. Thus, we here at JoBlo are doing something a little different by presenting our 10 favorite Martin Scorsese movies rather than his best. To note, Killers of the Flower Moon is not included, not because it doesn't qualify, but rather because Scorsese's movies, in our opinion, need to be viewed multiple times to see how they really fit into the canon. So without further ado, here we go. Let's start with an honorable mention, The Irishman. One could argue that Scorsese's last word on the gangster epics he's best known for is marred by some unconvincing de-aging, but truth be told, the CGI is only really distracting when the characters are meant to be in their 20s. For most of the movie, Robert De Niro's Frank Sheeran is middle-aged, and it's not hard to accept Bobby D, Joe Pesci, or Al Pacino as being in their 50s to 60s here. That aside, The Irishman is a great movie, with Pacino unexpectedly stealing the show as a rather likable Jimmy Hoffa. Now, number 10 is The Departed. While some may take issue with the fact that this is a remake of a Hong Kong film called Infernal Affairs, it's interesting to watch Scorsese make his most playful gangster epic, complete with iris in and iris out shots and a scenery-chewing performance by Jack Nicholson, and probably his last great role.
This ain't reality TV!
Everything about this movie is a blast, from the iconic soundtrack that includes Van Morrison's cover of Comfortably Numb and the Rolling Stones' Let It Loose, to one of the toughest roles given to a young Leonardo DiCaprio as the South Boston cop who goes undercover as a gangster. Perhaps most surprising of all is how Mark Wahlberg all but steals the movie as the smart-mouthed cop Dignam, who was so cool that for a while it looked like he would get his own spin-off movie. Number 9 is The Color of Money. Unfairly regarded as lesser Scorsese by some, this was his attempt to make a commercial, star-driven Hollywood movie after several years of flops. The fact that it's slick and entertaining shouldn't be held against it, with Paul Newman and Tom Cruise contributing masterful performances, with Newman finally winning an Oscar for his work here. Other commercial Scorsese movies like Cape Fear also get a bad rap. To me, they exist to show how versatile he is, and that if he wants to make a blockbuster, he easily can.
His hair is perfect.
Number 8 is King of Comedy. This is a movie that no one saw in 1983 but is now considered one of his defining works. In it, Robert De Niro plays a desperately unfunny stand-up comedian who idolizes Jerry Lewis's big-time TV personality. Watch this movie and then watch Todd Phillips' Joker to see how much the later film owes to this. As good as De Niro is,
but believe me, Jerry, I'm very good. I'm really good. I'm dynamite.
Jerry Lewis all but steals the film, playing a thinly disguised version of himself. Number 7 is a controversial one, The Last Temptation of Christ. While many consider the gangster film Scorsese's defining genre, if you followed his career, you'll also note how faith inspired much of his work. Last Temptation of Christ was one of the most controversial films of the 80s, with it an adaptation of Nikos Kazantzakis' book. It even shows Willem Dafoe's Jesus as being tempted by a quote-unquote normal life with a wife and kids, and it takes the controversial stance that in some ways Judas was Christ's most loyal apostle. Notably, it also introduced world music as a genre, with Peter Gabriel's score as iconic as the film. Martin Scorsese's Silence is actually a perfect companion piece to this. Number 6 is Mean Streets. This was Scorsese's first big movie, and it's pretty wild for something made in the early 70s. The craft on display is dazzling, as are the live-wire performances by Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro. While some are shocked by the casual misogyny, racism, and homophobia of the characters, Scorsese made a movie that was authentic to both its setting and its era. It's a pretty dazzling, energetic piece of work, especially if you happen to see it theatrically, where it's truly overwhelming. Number 5 is The Wolf of Wall Street. This was the movie where audiences and Scorsese finally seemed to catch up with each other, with his 3-hour fantasia of excess, an unexpected box office smash that introduced the world to Margot Robbie. This is as much of a gangster film as Goodfellas in a lot of ways, except that, if anything, the crooked money men here, played by DiCaprio and Jonah Hill, are even more soulless than the murderous gangsters depicted in the underworld movies. Scorsese invites you along to have a great time watching them blow rails and party, only to pull the rug out from under you in the end, showing you the real cost of their actions and how, just like the gangsters he depicted in Goodfellas, their only loyalties are to themselves and no one else. Number 4 is Casino. When this came out in 1995, many thought Scorsese's depiction of Las Vegas was over the top and excessive. And yeah, sure, it is those things. But it's also a total blast and features De Niro, Joe Pesci, and the gorgeous Sharon Stone operating at the peak of their talent. Like Goodfellas, were it not for this movie, it's unlikely The Sopranos would have existed. Number 3 is Raging Bull, Scorsese's masterful study of boxer Jake LaMotta, which introduced the world to Joe Pesci and pushed the limits as far as screen brutality went back in 1980. It was a box office failure, but now it's considered, rightfully so, a masterpiece. How the hell did Robert Redford's Ordinary People ever defeat this at the Academy Awards? Number 2 is Taxi Driver. Scorsese and Paul Schrader made a dark, disturbing piece of urban isolation and male rage that, if anything, is even more potent now than it was 50 years ago. Robert De Niro's Travis Bickle is a lot of things, but he's not the urban vigilante hero some saw him as in the 70s. Of Scorsese's movies, this is obviously his most dangerous, provocative work. His 1999 reteam with Paul Schrader, Bringing Out the Dead, is a very interesting companion piece, in that thematically they're similar, but the main character's nihilism in Taxi Driver is swapped out for pure compassion in Bringing Out the Dead, making it a very interesting movie to watch. And number 1, what else could it be but Goodfellas? What else can be said about the greatest gangster movie ever made? While The Godfather was the mafia epic, this was almost the mob's home movies, with it showing us the real way these street-level guys operated. Like the characters played by Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, and Joe Pesci, we get just as addicted to the lifestyle as they do, only to discover that, as things go bad, in the mob, self-interest is the order of the day, and that your worst enemies can be the people you hold the closest to your heart. So, that's our favorite 10 Martin Scorsese movies, but if you have a different opinion than ours, and I'm sure you do, make sure to let us know in the comments. We welcome your thoughts.